Hey guys, sorry this is not a typical video. If you're wondering why the runtime is so long, it's because most of this video, like 95% of it, is going to be the second time that I spoke with the YouTuber Wheat Waffles. This time he was interviewing me. I had to release this because I'm behind on my work. I'm not really behind, but there's some stuff going on. Anyway, the reason why I didn't do like a fancy thumbnail or anything for this video is I didn't want to waste people's time. So if you're just a casual viewer of this channel and you're just interested in some information about women or dating or relationships or whatever, just skip ahead to the interview if you like, or just exit this video now and click on the next upload. Things should be back to normal, hopefully. I made this video just because I wanted to let the true fans of the channel, and there's no pressure to be that, whatever, but I just wanted to be honest with you guys. For people who are like genuine supporters of me, I wanted to let you know what was going on. And the truth is, I'm just having massive issues at the moment with YouTube, the platform, unfortunately. So I'm not actually behind on my work. I've been working really hard recently. I've got scripts written, I've got videos filmed and edited. It's just that I'm just getting massively flagged for demonetization at the moment, and it's so demoralizing. I'm not saying I'm like the victim of YouTube censorship. Susan Wojcicki's not like nervous about my videos or my agenda or anything like that. I'm not getting into conspiracy stuff. It's the algorithm or the automated systems or whatever. It's frustrating because I can't seem to find a workaround for it at the moment. It all started with this video that it was like about a month ago. I did this video, really good video. I was really happy with it. It was about how men, who are insecure or low self-esteem, or they feel like they're not achieving, they can often desperately feel like they need a girlfriend, like that's what's missing in their life. But they should focus on themselves instead. But for whatever reason, that video was flagged as being hateful to women or whatever. And I rewatched the video and I was like, this video is just self-improvement. There's nothing bad in this at all. So I asked for a manual review, for a human to look at it, because I was sure it was a mistake, and it got hit. Again, no, they held up that it was an inappropriate video. And this wouldn't seem to be such a big deal, except for the fact that YouTube has now got this system where they're really relying on you to tell them when your content is appropriate or inappropriate. It's all based on trust. So just losing monetization on one video is not such an issue. But the problem is that I had told them that this video was safe, even to the point of, I'm sure it's safe, go check it yourself. And since they came back and said, no, this is not worthy of being monetized, now they don't trust me. Like every single video I upload now is instantly demonetized. I can't seem to get anything through. Incredibly frustrating. You're not seeing any ads on this video. And it sucks because I had built up quite a lot of trust. I understand some of my content isn't appropriate to run ads on it. When I do videos on porn or sex or sexual fantasies or whatever, I have told YouTube, yo, you probably don't want to run ads on this. And their little automated systems yeah, I appreciate you being honest, thank you. And what it does is it builds up credibility. Basically they're like, hey, you have trusted yourself to be truthful with us as to when your videos are worthy of being monetized or not, so we're going to trust your rating systems. And so when I put forward most of my videos, which is just dating advice for men and talking about female psychology, especially the problematic parts, so that men can avoid being abused, I think it's all safe. It's good information. And so I'm like, yeah, monetize this, this one's good, this one's fine, there's nothing inappropriate, sexual or hateful or anything like that. And they've been trusting me up until this point, which has been great. I've just been able to work and get compensated for my work, as any adult wants to get compensated for the work that they do. But that seems to be shut now. They don't trust me. What am I? I've got this plan. Sorry, I'm a bit tired. I've been working heaps over the next last couple of days, just trying everything to try and sort of fix this. So my plan to try and get back in good with the algorithms, I've got a video coming out. I've written the script for it. I haven't filmed it yet. It's about dick size, right? Totally inappropriate. We talk all about the length of dicks and how big your dick should be and how women feel about that, So it's a video that's been requested of me a number of times, and I'm like, all right, cool. there's no way this one's going to get monetized. So I'm going to release that one and say, yo, YouTube, this one's inappropriate. And then I've got a kind of update on a topic that I covered about 2 years ago in my Patreon exclusive content. And I think it's like my most popular Patreon video ever, but it's actually on a pretty tame topic. So I'm sort of doing an updated video on that one, sort of like a re-release kind of thing. And I'm going to be telling YouTube, this one's definitely safe, you know, like feel free to manually review it. Trust me, there's nothing bad in this particular one. And I'm hoping that doing that's going to get me back in the good graces, you know, make them trust me again so that there can be no more ongoing issues. So that's it. That's where I'm at. That's why I'm behind on my work and why you're getting this weird video today. Like I said, I'm sorry that there's not just ordinary content. You can skip ahead to the interview, but I wanted to let like people who don't just come here for the information, they care about me and they care about what happens to this channel. I wanted to let you guys know what's going on because it's actually pretty worrying. Like it scares me. It's weird to not have that kind of control. So if you're wondering what it is that you can do, there's nothing you can really do. We're just kind of got to hope that the computer helps me. If you want to write some nice things to me in the comments section, just to lift my spirits today because I'm feeling a bit down, I'd appreciate that. Being a YouTuber can sometimes be pretty lonely work. You know, spend a lot of time with yourself and your computer. So it's nice to actually connect with you guys. So yeah, any well wishes would be positive, but just largely, you know, keep on supporting me. But you guys have been great recently. Like every new video I'm released, I'm super happy with the reception, the comments, the views that I'm getting. I'm a little worried, like we don't know this as a fact, but there has been some speculation that videos and channels that aren't getting monetized are not really pushed by the YouTube algorithm, so it gets harder to reach new audiences. I don't know if that's true, but I have noticed that while my new videos are doing really well, my old videos aren't getting suggested like they used to. Used to be that would account for a lot of my views, you know, some of my older content, which is still, I think, fantastic, was getting watched by people. But people have been writing to me saying that like the up next column next to my videos, it used to suggest, you know, videos of that same channel. Like, oh, you're watching Alexander Grace? Check out Alexander Grace's other videos. Whereas now they're not getting suggested anymore. So it has meant that, I don't know, it just feels, I don't know if this is rational or not, but just feels like even though I'm so loving my core audience, it's getting harder to get the message out there and to reach new people, which, yeah, again, it's a bit worrying. It's a bit frustrating. You hate having like artificial kind of limits placed on you. You want to believe it's like a meritocracy. If you do better, you just do better, but it's not always how it goes. Anyway, cushioning the blow has definitely been, you know, you guys over on Patreon. I want to finish out the section by just thanking you so much because having my videos monetized on YouTube is not my only income source. Now that I put so much effort into building up this huge catalog of exclusive videos, I do have like a core group of people who are supporting me on Patreon, and I really appreciate that. That's absolutely amazing. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. If you guys have been thinking about signing up for Patreon like sometime in the future, it'd probably cheer me up a lot if you did it today. Be nice, you know, in the face of all these demonetization issues, to get like a nice boost of people coming in. I mean, you don't have to, but if you've been thinking about doing it, that would be a nice thing. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I feel like I'm always very respectful of people's time. I want to get to the points that I'm trying to make quickly. I understand you've got lots of other obligations. You know, here I am, I'm rambling now. That's not good. But hopefully this is the last you hear about this issue. Hopefully it all just kind of goes away and we can just go back to learning about relationships and women and dating and all of that stuff, and things can continue as normal. That's what I hope. That's all I want, is just for things to go back to normal. All right, enjoy the interview with Wheat Waffles. This was a really, really fun chat that I had, and it was the first time I'd ever actually given an interview. So like I'm speaking most of the time, and it was great, the questions that he asked, really good discussion. So if you haven't seen that yet, my apologies. I know people might have already seen it on his channel or on my Patreon. Just wait for 4 days, you'll get a whole new video on this channel. But in the meantime, check out that interview. It's a really good one. All right, thanks guys. I really appreciate your support. All right, see ya.
Hey guys, back for round 2 with Alexander Grace now. So obviously you might have saw round 2 with Hamza a couple days ago, and now I've got round 2 with Alexander Grace. And today's discussion is going to be all about monogamy. I know a lot of people like to talk about that in the comment sections of my videos, And Alexander Grace's videos, monogamy, polygamy, everything like that. I know that polygamy is like a massive online trend. Well, not online trend, real life trend that's like growing in the modern dating market. So this conversation is going to be all about those kind of issues. So I'm just going to give Alexander a quick chance to introduce himself for anyone who may not be aware of his content. So Alexander, I'll leave it to you.
I've been on YouTube for about 5 years. All of my content is about dating, relationships, evolutionary psychology, and the differences between men and women, and how men can better understand women so they can have healthier and happier relationships. Thank you for hosting this Wheat Waffles. And I'll tell you something. In my 5 years on YouTube with my channel, this is the first interview I've ever given. I've never done this before. So there's a special privilege for you.
Oh, thanks a lot. I guess the pressure's on both of us then, because this is the first interview I guess I've ever hosted. Because all of the other times this I've joined somebody else's either pre-recorded video or live stream. So this is a unique experience for both of us. But anyway, I'll jump in with the first question to avoid wasting any of the audience's time. So within this community, I believe it is widely regarded that the main benefits of monogamy fall into the hands of the women in a society. And the main argument for this is being that without monogamy, a man, after passing on his genes, has no obligation to hold up his end of the bargain and provide for his offspring. He is free to walk away and go about his business. Therefore, monogamy ensures men will be there to protect, serve, and sacrifice for the long haul in order to raise well-nourished children. What are your thoughts on this argument? Are you mostly in agreement or disagreement? Do you agree that the main driver of monogamy being introduced is for this reason?
Okay, so there's quite a lot to unpack there. There's definitely some truth to the fact that monogamy benefits women for the exact reason that you describe, but I don't know how realistic it is to say that monogamy itself was introduced by women for that purpose. I think there may have been like some subtle whispering from like the women into the tribal chiefs, ear back when this was first kind of being created in like human societies and cultures. But there's also benefits for men with monogamy. So like, for example, if it was simply a case of like the most powerful person in the tribe simply taking all the women for himself, then there's very little incentive for the men to continue contributing, because why would they continue to build shelters and go to war and hunt meat, if they're not really getting anything out of it, biologically speaking, if there's no chance for them to partner up and pass on their genes. So I think it's probably, like, as far as I know, the basic theory for how monogamy first came about in hunter-gatherer societies was probably along the lines of, this is the best way to incentivize every person to feel like they were contributing to the tribe because the tribe was contributing back to them, to make them kind of invested in their community. And monogamy is the most participatory, if that makes sense.
So is your main argument that it was mainly driven by men, the introduction of monogamy, to have a more inclusive, society in the respect that like the men at the like bottom of the pyramid, I guess, if that's what you would like to say, are going to be like have a much stronger chance of being able to reproduce and pass on their genes rather than just the one or like few guys at the top?
Yeah, it's not as simple as it was driven by men or it's driven by women, but let's think of it in terms of evolution, in evolutionary terms. Let's say there's 100 tribes existing in a valley in like the African plains or something like that. And some of the tribes have a polygamous system where one man has like 50 wives and then all the other men are expected to serve, but they don't get anything out of it in return. Well, how good are workers are they going to be? How enthusiastic hunters? How much social cohesion is going to be within that tribe? Is that cultural structure actually going to be successful in advancing the interests of that particular tribe? Now, let's say the rest of the tribes in the valley, they all have a monogamous social system. And so everybody feels like they're contributing to the community and they're getting something back from it, like it's a lot more equitable. Can you see how in those systems, the men are going to work harder? They're going to be more, happy to contribute it. So I think that possibly, like with as adaptable as humans are, there's probably all kinds of marriage structures, monogamy, polygamy, and everything in between, and even outside those outliers, was probably experimented with, but you tend to find that monogamy has lasted, and it's the most common that you find in lots of cultures. It's not universal, absolutely not, but it is the most common one that's found. And I think probably because evolution has just sort of weeded out all the other kind of mating structures. And then, of course, what happens is that evolution takes over and goes, oh, well, people, we need to start adapting our brains in order to incentivize what's been working on for social cohesion and things like that. So it becomes a self-reinforcing mechanism. But to say that it was necessarily men or women that drove that, I don't think you can think of things in that simplistic of terms.
Yeah, see, I was in complete like agreement for everything you said there, up until the point where you talked about a monogamous society makes men more competitive. I was just having a couple of second thoughts about that
Sorry to
argument
jump in. I'm
because
not sure I said that, or if I did, I didn't mean that.
no,
Monogamy
not
makes
competitive, not competitive. No, more driven and motivated. That was the argument I believe you said.
okay. Yep.
Because, but I was just having a couple of second thoughts about that particular argument because, in my opinion, if you're in a polygamous society where only the men at the very top of the pyramid are able to reproduce and pass on their genes, surely that would drive man to become, like to work even harder to like reach that top 10-15% of guys who is able to like dominate the dating market in that particular tribe. Meanwhile, if a society exists in a monogamous setting, then like once a man has his wife and he has just that one partner and he has his children, then he's like going to become more content with his like need to pass on further like his genes even further. So like he's pretty much going to become content with his drive to reproduce, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I do. It's a very interesting point. What I would say is that if you look at the law of diminishing returns, there is a limit to how much energy men are going to put into achieving a certain goal once they've achieved like 75% of it. So let's say that every man wants to have 10 children, because that gives him a good chance. But after he has 2 or 3, he's like, well, I've already achieved most of what I wanted in terms of reproducing and passing on my genes and making sure that, in a sense, my biological blueprint is immortal and it's going to get passed on. I think that's going to sap him from that motivation to get those next 7 like children. And the same could be like for money, like if everybody wants like £50,000 a year as their sort of income, you tend to find that people aren't going to work too much harder once they've met all of their basic needs. The kind of people who need to become Jeff Bezos's or whatever and have stupid amounts of money, there's almost something slightly wrong with them. They've got that hyper competitive, masculine ambition that's just going to, ignore everything else in their life, all to the exclusive focus of obtaining as much money. So when I was saying that it's going to make men contribute more and it's going to drive their enthusiasm, I can completely understand what you're saying about they want to reach the top, and the more that society is shaped like a pyramid, isn't that going to funnel all that ambition towards that? But what I'd say is that the kind of contribution that I'm talking about here isn't like a dominant, like I want to beat out the competition and be the top of the pyramid. It's not that kind of ambition. It's more the ambition of I want to live a good life. I want to provide for my family, and I'm going to be nice to the people inside my community. It's an ambition towards making sure everybody's taken care of. What I would call probably a healthy masculinity as opposed to like a lost masculinity.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of like putting that like phrasing an answer to that question. I just did also like just one other thought on that particular question popped into my mind as you were speaking. I guess also in a polygamous society that the men, instead of like trying to build themselves up and increase their value as much as possible to reach like the top 10, 15, 20% of guys, I would think you would find a lot of them would instead find it's a much more efficient strategy to like trample on their competition and eliminate their competition. Like in order to like reach the top. So that could actually cause a downfall of a tribe rather than like the success of it. So like I'm not sure if you knew this, but I remember that the homicide rate was 10% in like all throughout the medieval times, like God knows what it was in tribal times. I'm guessing it was like much higher. It was like one of the leading causes of death. And obviously now, like the homicide rate is well far below 1% in like the majority of the countries of the world. So, and I'm guessing a partial reason for that was that in like tribal times, obviously, because you're in like that hyper competitive environment where every man is trying to reach a top, that like homicide is going to be a massive issue. Like men will just like murder their competition in the sexual marketplace.
There's a couple of different things I want to say about that. So the first I'll say is that your point about it incentivizing negative behavior, like taking out your competition, is exactly right. And I think it reinforces the example I gave earlier about the 100 tribes in the valley. The ones that are polygamous are going to get phased out very quickly. They're not going to be the most successful tribes because it's going to incentivize the worst kind of behavior, viewing all of your fellow men as competition, as people to be gotten out of the way. You'd also see a lot of like affairs and infidelity, which tends to happen in polygamous situations. Like I read earlier this year, Holly Madison's book. She was one of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends. You know who Hugh Hefner is?
Yeah, he was that big entrepreneur for that massive like pornographic company. But
Yeah,
he died recently, didn't he?
he did.
And
So
he was just known for like living that massive like party lifestyle with like harems of women in his life for like literally his whole life. Like I know a lot of people in my comments will be like, oh, he was just a beta bucks or something like that. But yeah, he was like living that ravish lifestyle for like pretty much up until the day he died.
I don't know what value system your commenters are going by. Like, I mean, I don't really like the alpha beta dichotomy, but this guy had a lot of money and like he slept with like a harem of women. So if they don't consider him like alpha, I think they've got pretty tough standards. But the point I was going to make is that all of his girlfriends, they didn't want to be sleeping with some 90-year-old dude. In the tell-all book, she's like, yeah, they all had boyfriends on the outside. They could only last a couple of months, sleeping with him before it would just become too much. And so look, these polygamous societies, you're going to encourage the worst, I think, in human behavior, like foul play. I've got another point about what you said. Or did you have any comment on that one?
No, go ahead with your next point.
So it's difficult to know exactly what the homicide rate and the lifestyle was like for people back in like nomadic tribal times, back when we were hunter gatherers. And I do think that there is a tendency in modern civilization to like romanticize their lifestyle and, the noble savage and things were so peaceful and everybody lived in harmony. And it might not necessarily have been the case. However, I don't think that the evidence that we have from the modern day like hunter-gatherer tribes is as violent as it probably would have been in medieval times, because largely there was a kind of a burst of individualism and even the idea of like the individual after the agrarian revolution. And then you could divide things into, this is my property, this is your property, and these are my children, that's your children. If you look at the hunter-gatherers that still live alive today, they have much more of a sense of them all being an extended family. So there's less kind of competition. So even though there's probably still lots of violence, I don't think you would have found it was quite as homicidal, pre the agrarian revolution, back when we were legitimately just, wandering around the plains and valleys and hunting our food. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make actually quite a lot of sense. I didn't really think about those sort of points before through like my argument out there.
It's just sorry, I'll just jump in really quickly. It's one of those important distinctions that people do fail sometimes to make sense, is because there's such a huge difference between human beings living in the last 10,000 years and human beings who live for like the 200,000 years before that time. It's a completely different style of living. Now, perhaps our coding, like our biology, hasn't changed that much. Evolution can't work that quickly, but the environmental circumstances that we're born into, when there's like taxes and governments and cities, is so different to how it used to be when you're just sort of wandering around as a hunter-gatherer. And so you can't extrapolate lessons from one set of cultural circumstances to the agrarian cultures. And so it's just a good thing for everybody to know.
Yeah. There's some really like interesting points that you've made there. I'm going on to another point here, and another question, sorry. I've recently watched a video by this like new YouTuber. He's only like created his channel in the last year and a half or so. He's called Hamza Ahmed. Have you heard of his channel? He's been on my channel like a couple of times.
Sorry, Hamza, I've not heard of you except through like what Wheat Waffles just said before.
Oh, okay, fair enough. But I recently watched a video by him, and he creates like self-improvement content and some advice on like dating relationships and a little bit of evolutionary psychology as well. And one of the points he made in his video about monogamy, that his main reasoning for why it was introduced is that it was introduced by men to prevent women from being promiscuous. And his reasoning went as followed. So he said, like in every religion, or at least in the vast majority of religions, promiscuity in women is seen as like a massive, massive negative. Like it's in every religion, well, pretty much like the mainstream ones, such as Christianity, that you had this idea of the Virgin Mary, who was like she's seen as like the saint of, or like a massive, massive figure in like the Christian community, that she gave birth to Jesus as a virgin, and like that's a massive like sort of principle being taught within that religion, and it just kind of highlights this idea of purity and like a woman being so purity of a woman, like having a like not being promiscuous and ideas such as that. So do you think there's like truth to that argument that monogamy was introduced to like prevent women being promiscuous, and the main drivers of that was men?
Yeah, I think there's truth to it. I just I think it's dangerous to start like trying to find like the primary cause or the single cause, like there's so much that goes into this kind of stuff, and it's possible that each culture arrived at monogamy, the ones that did, for different reasons. But I will say that there's certainly strong elements of truth in Hamza, is that his name?
Yeah, his name's Hamza.
In what he's saying, because men are paranoid about paternity uncertainty with good reason. Like I have a video on my channel that people can go and look up. It's called The Dark Truth of Women's Concealed Ovulation. Like, you might not know this, but women, like human women, are amongst only, I think, 6 species out of the 5,000 plus mammals on the planet where it's not obvious when they're ovulating. They've concealed it. And the evolutionary psychology, the research on this is quite clear. The reason why women developed the capacity that men can't tell when they're ovulating and when they're not is so that they could more easily cuckold their monogamous partners and go sleep with Mr. Good Genes, have his baby, but then convince Mr. Chump Provider guy that the baby was his all along. So deception about who the father is actually built into the design of the human body, the human female. And so men are, of course, terrified of this. There's no bigger sucker in biological terms than raising another man's child. I mean, it's not funny. It's really not. Paternity uncertainty is a horrible thing. It's just that when you're talking about like the religion and the focus on purity, it struck me as funny because I'm like, yeah, like men are so terrified about being made fools of in this regard that they'll even invent whole religions and gods and this whole mythology and this metaphysical, scripture and things like that in order to justify trying to keep women from being promiscuous. That's how scared we are at a biological state. And I just hadn't really made that connection before. But whether or not that's behind, why we're so strict on monogamy, that's debatable. But I think there's definitely there's merit to that argument at the very least.
Yeah, I think you might get a few angry people in the comments on your remark about saying inventive religion by man, but it's besides the point anyway. I just found.
Do you mind if I address that really quickly?
Yeah, go on.
Love you, Christians. It's one of those weird things where the people who reach out to me, and I have some dedicated Christians on my Patreon, and they'll talk to me about their religion, and they'll, I just find I get on so well. We have so many of the same values. So please, thank you for giving me the chance to say this. Like, I personally, I don't believe in your religion. I'm an evolution guy. I'm a science guy, but it is nothing but respect.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for clearing that up. I just found the first point that you said about, what is it, ovulation. What was it referred to again? Like suppression.
Concealed ovulation.
Concealed ovulation. Yeah, I just found that unbelievable that very thing like is within the like design of the human like evolution. I just found that unbelievable. And I remember like seeing a couple of other studies like on this. It's called the dual mating strategy, that when a woman's on the ovulation part of her fertility cycle, that she is more likely to be promiscuous, sleep with a high quality mate. Like, and you even see this like nowadays. So women are more likely to go out to nightclubs, bars, like go out with like the other girls in the group to, look for a short term hookup partner. Meanwhile, for the other 3 weeks of her ovulation cycle, then she is more likely to be interested in the less masculine, like more beta provider sort of person, I guess, if that's what you would call it. Have you heard up on those studies as well?
Oh yeah. I find that absolutely fascinating. And I love talking to women about that kind of thing, because it does such a good job of demystifying our behavior and kind of reducing our confusion and the mystique around all this attraction and sexuality, when you actually demonstrate like, okay, cool, like here's a study that showed when women were ovulating, here's how their behavior changed. And some of the women find it incredibly funny. Like they're like, oh my God, that's so true. They have a big laugh about it. But I find maybe like 1 in 10 women or so gets really offended, like the idea that, their behavior and their choices can be reduced to biological impulses and things like that. And the thought that they'd be more likely to stray or be attracted to a different type of man, they strongly deny it, which is always funny to me, because so many of their sisters have completely dobbed them in and been like, oh yeah, that's definitely us. I'm curious, have you ever spoken to women in your life about those studies? I'm curious to know what their reactions have been.
Not about those particular studies, but I have spoken about like a few other like horrifying, well, not, I guess if that's what you want to call it, horrifying studies to do with like evolutionary psychology with women, but not those ones in particular.
I advise you, give it a try, bring it up in a conversation.
Yeah.
If you can do it seamless, and everybody listening, that's a really funny one. Like hopefully maybe you'll put like a link to the study or like a video you've done covering it. Like get familiar with the talking points and then have a conversation with women about that one. You'll have some fun. It's a fun conversation.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it is the like sort of conversation I want to be leading women down. I mean, I might create a few aggressive terms with them, but it might be interesting. Like if I'm just talking to someone casually.
In a sense, you could think of it as giving women a biological out. Like I think a lot of our behavior, and this is true for men too, like our indiscriminate sexuality, our violence, some of the stuff that men do is really quite awful. But when you understand the biological impulses and the reason why evolution positively selected for something, I actually think it has the effect of reducing some of the stigma that surrounds those behaviors. And so if there are women who are feeling a little bit ashamed about the fact that, God, once a month, they're just craving to go to the club and hook up with some dude, they don't know what comes over them, actually saying like, hey, I understand the impulse. You don't need to be ashamed about the fact that you have that. Here's the biological evolutionary reason why you're feeling that way. It can make them feel a lot better about themselves and also give them more information for them to internally battle against that part of themselves. Like, oh, I know what this instinct is. I know what this desire is. No, I'm not going to follow that one. I'm going to stay rational. I'll just wait for this emotion to pass, rather than it suddenly be like, oh my God, is this my new identity that I need to do this? Will I be betraying myself if I don't go have a one night stand with Mr. Giga Chad like right now? And it can send women into a bit of a tailspin, which is why, like, I know I'm ranting. Sorry. Thank you for giving me the chance to do it. But it's why I particularly dislike accusations of misogyny, if I ever receive them, to do with my channel. Because yes, I'm in the business of explaining female psychology, and often a lot of it dark female psychology. But I'm always explaining things in terms of like legitimate biological imperatives that women have, or coping mechanisms, or survival strategies. It's not like I'm just saying women are morally degenerate and they're bad people. Shame, shame, shame. That's never the point of my content. And so I can understand your reluctance to bring this up with like the women in your life, because you think you might get a really antagonistic response. But my advice to you like I found this to be very, very successful, is if you can do it in a genuinely non-judgmental way. Like if you genuinely don't feel judgment about it, it's just an interesting thing to discuss. Women will open up to you and you'll find out some really interesting shit. Like people sometimes ask me, Alexander, where did you learn like the information that you present on your channel? What book should I read? And the honest truth is that a lot of it's just things I've been thinking about, but most of my raw data genuinely comes from conversations from women. And people doubt the truth of that because like women will never tell you the truth. They'll just sort of lie to you. And I'm like, man, you've got to learn how to speak to women. If they sense that you're being judged, they'll shut down, they'll clam up, they won't tell you a fucking thing. But if you can generally provide like a safe space for them because you're not feeling judgmental, they'll open you up into their world because they're desperate to talk about themselves. Women love to talk about themselves. You just got to know how to get it out of them.
Yeah. Oh, I've got so many things to cover, so many thoughts just like rush into my mind, like just based on like all of the things that you just said. I'll try to get through all of them. So the first thing you said about was having conversations with women about like the differences in between you know each sex and the evolutionary reasoning behind that, or like even the changes in the modern dating market today. So I remember as soon as you asked me about like, have you ever had these sorts of conversations with a woman? I remember last night I had one conversation exactly like that, and I did like kind of get an aggressive response from it. And we was talking about the divorce rate, how it's skyrocketed in the last like 50 to 100 years. Like, I'm not sure if you've seen the chart, but it's like a hockey stick. It's just gone like rampant in the last 100 years. It's went from something like 5% to like over 50%. It's just crazy. And I remember explaining the reasons for like why those things exist, for why the divorce rate has skyrocketed in the last 100 years. And I believe the main reasons is because 100 years ago, obviously, a woman divorcing her partner, it would like the implications that it would have for her children is that they would either like be taken away from her. She like I'm not sure if you've heard about this, but in the UK, like as little as 50 years ago, there was this concept known as forced adoption, like where if a woman was pregnant for an unknown pregnancy, then she would be forced to like give up her child. Like I was just shocked. Like I didn't even know like that was a thing in like the modern world. So there was that. And obviously financially, her splitting up with a partner when she wouldn't have a reason when she wouldn't have a means to provide for her children, like divorce was also a unviable option for her to uptake. So based on those like two reasons alone, it the we've seen like the divorce rate like massively skyrocket in the last 100 years because the consequences of those reasons is massively diminished. And in fact, we're actually seeing the opposite effect. The financial potential after divorce nowadays is so massive, and in some ways like even a net positive for a woman, like because obviously the like divorce courts are so strong, and a woman can get like massive sums of money and income from after like having a divorce, especially if she's had children as well. And going back to the point, the woman that I was having this conversation with, like she did like give quite an aggressive response. Like she was like, "Oh, you know, like those are like good things though. Like of course, like it's unfair for a like society to like forcibly take a woman's children away from her if she can't financially provide for the children." And like she got aggressive, but I think she was missing the point that I wasn't actually giving any opinions about the like nature of it, like whether it's a good thing or whether it's a bad thing for society. I was literally just highlighting the reasons themselves. But even just explaining the reasons, explaining the science, explaining like why we are seeing the trends that we are, that was enough to like elicit a aggressive response. Like if I did make some opinions such as, things were so much better back then, like women didn't have any power, and that was a good thing for society, like if I made those sorts of remarks, then fair enough, like I would have understood like her aggressive reaction to it. But I didn't even say anything like that. I was just highlighting the reasons and the trends that we are seeing, but that was enough to like elicit an aggressive response. And I remember, I think this is I've been rambling on for like quite a lot in the last couple of minutes or so, but I remember I've seen quite a lot of situations like that in your older content where you used to interview women from like beaches and college campuses and so on, that you almost get like two different faces from the reactions that you get. You'll get the women that like just understand that, like you just explain these different things, like these different concepts, and think like, oh yeah, that's true, yeah, that does happen. And then you'll get other women who like just turn a complete like negative head to it. They're like, oh, how dare you say things like that? You shouldn't say things like that to me, like especially if you don't know me in depth. Like, why are you having these conversations with me? Do you kind of get what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I was kind of just, well, I don't really have a question, but I was just like branching on from the point that you was talking about, that like sometimes you get these aggressive responses
Mm.
from a woman, like after having like these conversations with them, irrespective of whether you are having, like you're making bad opinions or judgments about somebody or not.
100%. So, like with those old interviews, there did come a time where I was like, okay, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have some aggressive responses for the sake of content. And so I would sort of let it go like a little bit more. When I first started off, I would, socially calibrate to try and make things as calm as possible, because I generally found that the calmer I was and as non-controversial as I was coming across, the more honesty I would get, and the more, I think, maybe truth you'd actually get from women. Like, again, what I was saying is women would volunteer the truth about what there are going on when they sense that this is a sort of judgment-free zone. But, a little bit of conflict is not necessarily a bad thing, because when you see two people disagreeing, it does give you a chance to actually sort out your own mind, especially if one person's taking the position that you previously had, and then you can see the other person counter it. And if you're open-minded, you can change your mind. And so I introduced a new segment on my channel called Respectful Disagreement. There's about 4, I think, on my public channel, and maybe 1 or 2 on my Patreon, where I would say something outrageous to one of these girls, something like, ambition isn't feminine, it's masculine. It's something that I know could be misinterpreted. And then the woman would be like, what? Like, how could you say that? And she'd start off like ready to really tear into me. And then the challenge that I gave myself in the conversation was to explain my point of view, to explain the nuance, to listen to what she was saying, to integrate whatever logic or rationality she was displaying, and then use that to actually support my points, and ultimately see if we could come to a point where even if we disagreed, we did so respectfully and she could understand where I was coming from. And I loved that challenge. It was a little bit exhausting to have to go out to the streets and like find women to do it. But honestly, if I could do that all day, every day, I'd probably do that. I find that kind of thing really, really fascinating. And it was very difficult for me listening to you tell your story to not like jump in with like advice, like, oh, once you responded like this is what you should have done in order to handle it. So, but I didn't want to, I don't know, like lecture you
Yeah,
or anything
no.
without your invitation. But if you'd like to go into that, I'd be more than happy to.
I think I the advice that you was about to say was like pretty much what I did anyway. So my response to it, like after she got like aggressive, like initially was like, I'm not actually making any opinions. Like I just explained to her, like I'm just pointing out the trends and the reasons behind it. Like I'm not like this is just reality. This isn't like my opinions or anything like that. This is just like how the dynamic has changed in the last 100 years. And after I explained that, then she was a lot calmer and like able to have a much more like respectful discussion. I wanted to go back to a point that
That
you
wouldn't
spoke
have been
about.
my advice, by the way.
Oh, what would your advice have been then?
So look, she sounds like a decent girl, so she's obviously not out for blood, but sometimes you can find yourself in situations like that. The difficulty with what you did in the first instance is that you legitimized her initial criticism by defending yourself. And she made a point and then you responded to her point. So even though it did potentially get resolved, there's still an energy of, well, Wheat Waffles had to defend himself. And so there must have been some legitimacy to the attack. If you ever find yourself being attacked like by a woman or really anybody, and it's like a straw man argument, they're accusing you of things that you haven't done, or haven't said, or don't necessarily believed, what you should probably do, in my opinion, is to just put like a kind of stop to the conversation, just like a pause. Like after she said her thing, don't respond straight away, even though you're potentially hurt or frustrated and you feel that need to defend yourself. You'll get her to pay attention to you and actually stop and consider how she just came across. If you give it a pause, like even if you just say, can you give me a second? And then you leave it like 10, 15 seconds. And in that silence, that's when she starts to be like, what's going on? This is different. Like I would expect him to defend himself or to argue with me or something like that. And then what you respond with is not like cognition. You don't respond to the points that she's made. You respond to the way that she's sort of made them. You say, I have some things to say in response to what you've said, but I'm just having a little bit of difficulty because I kind of feel hurt, to be honest, that like you thought I was saying all of those things. Like I feel like a little bit like shaken from the way that you've kind of come to me. Like I wasn't saying any of the things that you accused me of saying. Like that wasn't my perspective at all. And I kind of feel like I'm in a position to defend opinions that I don't even have. Now, at that point, ideally, her demeanor should change. If she's a decent girl, she's like, oh my God, like I was totally not calibrated. Women do not like to be in the position that you've just put them in, because you've essentially, in as calm a way as possible, accused her of kind of bullying you or manipulatively framing the argument. So you want to get her in as open mind as possible, where she's itching for reconciliation, because women don't like conflict. And so if you kind of withdraw that and be like, whoa, this is suddenly a tense situation that you have created, she'll be desperate to be like, oh, let me get back to you. So once you've got her in that frame of mind, that's when you can actually go to the points. I actually wasn't making any value judgments about whether it's good or bad. I was simply relaying the facts. And isn't this interesting, the way things have changed? And then she'd be like, oh yeah, no, totally. You know, I get where you're coming from. Does all that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. You know, that's actually like, out of all of the advice that you give in your channel, like the social dynamics advice in terms of like how to have effective conversations is like probably my favorite advice that you give. Like I think there were some really intelligent points that you just made in the last like 30 seconds or so. Like I remember, I think this is probably my all-time favorite video of yours. I forgot the exact name, but I remember it was about what you need to do in a situation. Like, so say if you're out in town and you're looking for directions of how to get to the cinema, and you approach a woman and you say, hey, do you know where to get to the cinema? And obviously when you ask that question, a woman's going to have like a variety of different reactions. Like she can either be calm and positive, or she can like be aggressive and think, like, why are you asking me this? Like, why have you just interrupted my space and things like that? And I just love that video, the fact that you broke down like step by step. If you get this response, you need to do this. If you get this response, you need to do this. Like that was, I forgot exactly what the video was called. Like hopefully you can provide a title, because I'm sure a lot of people from my audience and your audience would like really appreciate watching that content. I just love that video.
I think it was called the number one most annoying trait women have, which is like they're always assuming you're hitting on them.
yeah, I just love that video. So I think that's like the most high value advice that you give out on your channel. And I wanted to go back to another point now that you made a little while back. But
Thank you, by
like
the way.
Relevant. Yeah, I think it's like relevant to the topic. And I'm so glad that you spoke about this, and you bring it up so many times in your video as well. I suffer it quite a bit on my channel, and I know you do for a fact, like because you keep having to like clear it up. But you get quite a lot of accusations of misogyny on your channel. And what I like about your channel is that you don't just highlight the negative behaviors of women. And that is what people often like assume that your channel is about. It's just about highlighting these negative behaviors, you know, like from an evolutionary psychology standpoint. And because of that, they like then just slap on the label misogyny onto you. I think that's like a massively like stupid argument that people make, like because they obviously haven't watched enough of your content. Because in a lot of your videos, you also talk about the positives as well. Like these are some of the positive traits that women have from an evolutionary standpoint, or can develop. These are the positive traits that high quality women have, and things like that. So I'm really glad that you cleared that up. That like you're never that I obviously like I haven't watched all 400 of your videos, but from my experience, you've never. Yeah, I've watched probably about 200 of them, so I'm doing quite well.
You support me on Patreon too, so there's even more like exclusive private ones.
Yeah. I'm your most loyal supporter. What are you talking about? Yeah. So, but I've never seen you in any of your videos like make like rash opinions like that are just like hateful or misogynistic. Like it's always from a objective standpoint with the studies and science to back it up, and you're merely just like highlighting the facts.
I don't know if I'll ever reach that point where that criticism doesn't like trigger me, because it just seems so unfair when I just feel like I go to so much effort to guard against it. And because obviously I have like women in my life, like the thought of like, oh my God, like I hate women, like it's very, very triggering. And it's particularly frustrating that like when people, like if I get like a nasty email, or sometimes people will like link to me to some discussion forum where they're talking about my videos, and I see the criticisms that are being leveled at me, they're so dishonestly framed, they're so ill-informed, they're so awful, like they're so desperate to find some boogeyman misogynist out there that they'll just happily project it onto me. And it would be a lot easier to deal with if it was legitimately like framed in terms of I actually think there could be something problematic about this perspective. Have you considered this nuance? Like we should discuss this. Is there a hidden misogyny there? And it's like, oh, wow, fascinating. Let's get into it. But it's not, it's never, it's just, oh my God, Alexander like hates women or something like that. And in one sense, you could say, well, doesn't that make it easier to ignore? And well, to be fair, yes, from one perspective, but I think one of the reasons why I find it so confronting is I'm scared of the irrationality of human beings. Like I read books about like North Korea and Mao's China and Soviet Union. And I think like about how human beings can treat each other when rationality goes out the door, and when we don't give each other the respect and dignity that you should afford other human beings, like actually taking the time to understand their arguments, giving them the benefit of the doubt, asking follow-up questions instead of just instantly demonizing them and saying this person's an awful person who deserves nothing but pain and suffering because they think differently to me. When I see that in other human beings, I genuinely feel like an element of terror. And as someone who puts their content out online, and I'm trying so desperately to show the nuance of the whole thing, when I encounter that kind of blind stupidity ready to demonize and scare me, like I don't have that, oh, well, it's just the internet. I have that fear of, oh God, there are fucking irrational people out there and they might come for me. And it scares the crap out of me.
Yeah, I have two questions based on this particular point. So first of all, do you think there is a bias for highlighting the negative behaviors of women on your channel?
Yep.
So like if you were to like, draw up like a tally between the positives of women, positives of men, negatives of women, and negatives of men, do you think that by far like your negatives of women tally will like greatly outnumber the others on that chart?
Massively. And it didn't used to be this way. Again, I'm going to bore everybody with my evolution metaphors, but you watch your content evolve based on what is popular, because you need to find out, well, what is the audience struggling with? So there was a period of time, like, when I first started making my kind of talking head videos, where I just had like 50 topics that I was interested in talking about, and I kind of went through them. But it wasn't until I started doing live consultations with people, like people would call me up with their problems and they say, I'm struggling with this, or my girlfriend's acting like this, that I really think that my content took like a whole new level, because it was less just my mind and it was more of a conversation with my audience. Like, well, tell me, what are the problems that you're dealing with? And the truth of the matter is that from an evolutionary perspective, we don't tend to pay attention to things that are going well. We tend to pay attention to things that are negative, dangers, threats and things like that. And so people tend to seek out information like, why? No one's typing, why is my girlfriend so pleasant? Why do I feel so much love when I look into her eyes? What are my best cuddling positions? Like that's just not what people need. The kind of thing that causes them to go onto YouTube to try and find a content like mine is, holy shit, I don't understand what just happened on my date, or I'm lonely and I'm horny and I don't know what to do about it, or my girlfriend's acting crazy and I don't understand it. Like there's some like urgency to their problem, and they come to that. And so my channel evolved to be a lot more focused on the dark aspects of female psychology and problems and things like that, in response to what people were seeking out in their content. And it's depressing in one sense, because I'm aware of the perception of, oh, well, he only ever has like negative things to say about women. But it's just evolved to that point as I kind of followed the audience as to what kind of content they need. And it's one of the things that keeps me sane with regards to my Patreon, is because on that channel, I kind of just cover what I want to cover. So I think you asked for like a breakdown of like negative to positive content. I would say 90% negative content about women, 5% positive content about women, and then like 2.5% like for the negative and the positive of men. Oh, there's probably more positive to do with men, because men need a bit of a pick me up sometimes. I think like, hey, your masculinity is good. I actually do cover that quite a lot. Maybe that's more like 20%. I might be being a bit harsh on myself, but this ratio doesn't carry over to my Patreon. That's a lot more just like me. And I know like I get a lot of positive comments like in my DMs over Patreon from people saying, well, this is like where your content really takes off, because when people get to know my worldview, they want to know more than just kind of problems. They want to know the positive things that I have to say. And I get beautiful messages after my videos saying, holy crap, that was such a beautiful explanation of this. And this made me realize what's so good about my relationship and things like that. And I have a very strong female following on Patreon, like a much higher ratio of female patrons than I do just on my regular YouTube channel, which is like 95% male. On Patreon, it's more like 20 or 30%. And I love reading the messages I get from the women there, because, you know, they come to there and they hear me talk a lot more positively about women. So long rambling answer, but what you're seeing is absolutely correct. But I don't personally believe that it's evidence of me being misogynistic or anything like that. I just think it's typical of YouTube. You know, it's about problem solving. It's about correcting ignorance, you know, and you'll see my titles and my thumbnails. It's like, you know, big scared faces and like, here's a problem and you got to know about it. And that's just the nature of the beast, I feel.
If you have such a large female audience on your Patreon, you must get quite a few of them hitting on you.
No. I don't know if I've ever been. I get some nice comments, like people, like they're very generous with compliments and things like that. You know, I posted your face rating video, like before we knew each other, the one where you were like pointing out all my flaws. I had women there like going, I think you're really good looking and things like that, and that was quite sweet. But I don't think that's hitting on me. Most of the women who follow me on Patreon, and I've developed, you know, friendships with a lot of them, they're in relationships, or like they're older or something like that. I think, like, if I'm honest, there have been a couple who've sort of reached out, but it's, I don't know. I think it's negligible. I don't want to focus on that. It's not.
I'm not surprised. It's a bit of a really strange like nuance about having a large channel on YouTube. But going back to the first like block of like spoke that you talked about, it sounded like you made two main points. The first one about how there's like a more of a negativity bias on like your channel and in fact like YouTube in general. I just think that stems from the fact that human beings in general have a bias towards negativity. So like, even if you look at the news, like it's going to be very, very boring news that won't sell if they just said, oh, the crops have successfully grown this year with no issues. There's an abundance of food. It's like once in every, nobody's going to read or buy that. But when the crops do fail, like when there's a typhoon that wipes out all of the crops, then that's like headline news, and that's gonna like cause massive issues, and people want to find out about that. So I think it's just the like nature of human beings in general that they have a bias like to solve issues and seek out like the problems within their own life and try to rectify them. The second point you made was about how on your channel, like there is a massive bias towards negative female behaviors. Like you said, 90%, but then you like try to rectify those numbers. So it's probably around 75%. Based on that, do you think that it is a valid argument then when people not necessarily a valid argument, but do you think it makes it easier for people to slap on that misogynistic label to yourself and your channel because there's that huge bias towards highlighting the negative female behaviors?
Yeah. And I think that it's got enough credibility as an argument that I think that there is a responsibility on me to make the points as often as I can, as often as I can in my videos, to point out the nuance, to walk back, some of those things. Like, I wouldn't feel good about creating content that did just completely shit on women and only presented the negative. Like I said, a lot of it's more covered in my Patreon, but you'll notice in my videos, particularly more towards the end, I'll be like, all right, now I've just gone through all those problems, but here's some of the nuance, here's some of the exceptions, here's why you don't need to be angry about it and walk it back. So I think I think that there's enough credibility that it does actually create a responsibility for me as a creator to make sure that that's not the ultimate takeaway from it. I would imagine that people who just look at like my thumbnails and my titles might have like a very negative view of my content, because it's specifically designed to like shock, to be like, oh my God, you can't say that, to click on it. But hopefully, my hope is that in the actual content itself, like once I've got you through the door by appealing to those evolutionary mechanisms of like, whoa, what's going on with the thumbnail and the title, you'll actually see that the content itself is reasonably balanced and rational.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I've even spoken about this on my own channel, that it's just the nature of YouTube that the thumbnail and title in particular is supposed to be extreme, sensationalist, clickbait, and like project like one extreme point of view, because that it literally gets more views, it gets more impressions, it gets like more watch time and everything like that. So like that's just to get somebody through to the door. But then once you actually get into the nitty gritty of the content, then it is important that you're not extreme and like you are like giving rational and based arguments.
Exactly.
I'm just
I
I'm
just want to finish up on that point. Do you mind if I just speak quickly?
Yeah, go
on. So I just think like, and I'm not looking for a pity party or anything like that, but I don't think people who don't do this work on YouTube actually understand what this like. And I have a very quick story just to demonstrate this, because it's not like I enjoy the fact that YouTube is like that. I've kicked and screamed and fought against it for so long, but just to drive the point home, about 4 videos ago, I released a video, and on our YouTube Creator Studio, it tells you what ranking your video is based on how many views it's getting compared to the previous 10 videos. And my video was 10th out of 10. And I was really proud of the thumbnail, really proud of the title. I was like, yeah, this is a really informative, educational title. And then the video was bombing. And I was gutted because, God, it was such a good video, like I'm biased, of course, but I was like, I make so many good points. I really want people to see this one. And so I changed the title and I went to bed. And when I woke up, it was my #1 video. And you know what I did? I changed it from a positive sounding title to a negative sounding title. Exact same video, but it went from my worst performing to my best performing. And just before anybody like criticizes YouTubers for playing that game, do you see what's at stake if you don't? I'm not going to die on the cross for like I'm not going to be a martyr for the causes of super accurate titles. I want people to watch the videos. And so if that's what's going to get them to click on it, I'm going to do that. But I won't sacrifice my integrity with regards to the actual content. That's not going to be sensationalized. It's going to be rational.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And that is like what I follow that exact model on my content as well. Like, and in fact, it's just so frustrating when people don't even watch like the content of my videos, but they just look at the titles and thumbnails and then make their judgments based on that. Like the video I released last month, like it got 100,000 views in the first week. It's like became like by far like my most highest performing video like that early on. Like most of my regular uploads will get like a couple 10,000 views within the first week of upload, but this like got completely blown out of the water. It got well over 100,000 views, and it was titled 8 Reasons Why Ugly Women Think They're a 10 out of 10. And I think it goes without saying that I obviously don't believe that literally, but that's the impression that like people will get from the the title and the thumbnail. But like if I was to create an honest, objective title and thumbnail, it would be something like, these are the 8 reasons for why women overestimate their attractiveness by like 10-15%. Like it would be something like that. But I deliberately like it's almost like a curse of YouTube that you are like, if you're a content creator, you have to sensationalize your content and make it seem extreme just in order to like just to break like the surface of like getting noticed on YouTube, because otherwise it's just like dark feedback loop. And I've talked about it in one of my videos on like the way the YouTube algorithm works, is that it's so sensitive to the way the like impressions and click-through rate works, that if you have so the click-through rate is like how many times your thumbnail is shown and how many people actually click on the thumbnail itself. And if you have a difference of like 1%, so let's say if you have a 6% click-through rate, then that means that your video like is completely blessed by the algorithm. You get hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views. But if you have a 5% click-through rate, then the video can completely tank and it will bomb. So, and in order to get that extra 1% of click-through rate, like all it can take is just clickbaiting the title and thumbnail a little bit, like just to get the viewer interested. But then once you actually get to the video, it's the exact same either way. Like the video doesn't change, but the title and thumbnail changes, and it can have a monumental effect on the performance of a video, such as the example you just highlighted, where you changed the thumbnail and title, and your video blew up overnight, despite the video being the exact same as it was before and afterwards.
Yep, 100%. Though we should move on to another topic in case people criticize us for feeling too sorry for ourselves.
Yeah, just talking about the performance of our channels. I did have one other, because we've been talking about this subject for like so long, then I forgot the other like point I was going to bring up. But I'll move on to one of the other questions that I have prepared already. Let's have a look. I think this will be a really interesting one. I've been meaning to ask you this for like such a long amount of time because I know how much you like to talk about it. Should paternity tests be obligatory on a man's request?
Yes.
Yes, really. I'm really surprised you gave that answer. I thought that you'd be in disagreement. I thought that you would say like a woman should be able to, like have control of her own body. That like she's entitled to like not be interfered by an external like instrument to find out like the paternal father of her child.
My God, what content have I released that's led you to believe I would think that? I'm very concerned.
From my experience, I think that you're I'm not 100% sure like why I thought this, but you give a more like liberal perspective on your channel. So I thought that you'd maybe like disagree with what is it, the like force like paternity tests. But like I'm interested to hear your reasoning for why you think forced paternity tests should be allowed.
I mean, fuck. The thought of even calling it like a forced paternity test just grates at my very soul. It's the worst example of toxic femininity is motherhood entitlement. Women who believe that because they grow the baby, that the fatherhood has like visitation rights or babysitting rights or something like that. I say, fuck that. Women, growing a baby is fucking difficult, and my full respect to what you go through. You don't get enough credit for it. But the moment that you exclude the father and claim that he doesn't have any rights because he didn't grow that baby, you are indulging in the worst kind of toxic femininity. I'm 100% support. Not even like, for me, it should be a default. As soon as the baby's born, there should just be a mandatory paternity test like done as one of the routine tests. I can't see any justification for not being that way. Whatever arguments women have against paternity tests, I think are bullshit. I've never heard a single one that I thought had any ounce of credibility. As far as I'm concerned, it's only propagated by women who want to get away with cheating men in the worst possible way that you can cheat a man. I have no sympathy for it. Any to be honest, like, sorry, I know I'm emotional and I'm triggered right now, but if there's like any women out there who would argue against this point from me, you would probably encounter an Alexander who's not particularly rational. I'd be quite emotional from it. I find it extraordinarily dehumanizing that any women could possibly object to this.
I may have triggered you a little bit.
Sorry.
But I may be about to trigger you. I may be about to trigger you a little bit more. Okay. One of the most convincing arguments I've heard in favor of being against forced paternity test, is the element of trust. So like on an individual basis, if a man is so obsessed with wanting to get a paternity test for his wife and child, do you not think that like it's borderline like an accusation of the woman cheating? Like if he's that adamant with his wife getting a paternity test, it's almost an accusation of him saying that the woman is cheating or has cheated on him in the past. Can you see the truth in that argument?
No, it's total bullshit. That's just like not at all. That's just perhaps because it's so embedded in our culture. There are probably some people listening to this right now who are thinking, yeah, that sounds reasonable. But I'm telling you, the reason that sounds reasonable to you is because you have existed in a female-led paradigm where the values of the woman have been elevated as super special and the needs and interests of men have been denigrated to the point where that would seem like a legitimate argument. A woman's like a bit upset, like, oh, he doesn't trust me, and like there's going to be a verification process, compared to a man getting fooled and wasting his life raising another man's child? Is there any comparison that you could possibly make between the two of them? I also don't find any legitimacy with people objecting to things like prenuptial agreements and stuff like that. We need to take the specialness and the uniqueness and the romanticism away from relationships and bring it right back down to the biology. I'm not saying that love and beauty and companionship aren't totally real things, but at a core level, you can't just enter into these massive life-changing arrangements like raising children and getting married without having a modicum of predictions about what's going to happen in the future if things go wrong. Maybe we should be sensible about this. Maybe we should talk about whether or not the assets that I have when we bring into the marriage should be split equally. Can we have a discussion about that? Maybe we should talk about like, hey, I'm a little concerned that this child might not be mine because they have black hair and we're both blonde, like.
Sorry, just to interrupt there. Like, do you not think that very insinuation of you saying of a man telling his wife, hold on a second, I don't think this child is mine. Do you think that's not going to be heartbreaking for the woman?
Okay, so this is why
saying, how dare you doubt like my obligation to stay loyal to you? How dare you doubt that?
Okay, I can understand that, but also understand every single woman who did cheat and had someone else's baby is also going to react that exact same way. How dare you doubt me? And so this is why I would say you don't have it be something that is granted upon a man's request. It should just be standard as part of every baby that's born as one of the tests that's done.
I think that's probably a better solution, because if that was the case, then there wouldn't be any argument about, oh, you've broken trust. Because if it was a standard procedure anyway, then obviously, like the woman wouldn't be able to accuse the man of, doubting her trust. However,
yeah, look,
just
like,
based on.
Sorry, just like think of it from the prenuptial agreement example. Obviously, if a man says, hey, before we get married, I need you to sign this prenup, there's going to be like a feeling of, oh, don't you trust me? And isn't this going to be forever? But that's why I'm completely in favor of taking the stigma out of it. I think that every single couple that wants to get married and have it recognized by the state, they should have some kind of formal appointment set up with, hey, this is part of the procedure of getting married. If you're going to enter into this relationship, which the government has special rules for, we do require that you chat with one of our solicitors or whatever to talk through, like, what are your legal rights? What are your assets? Would you like to have a prenuptial agreement? We have these contracts like as a default that everybody kind of writes up, but we're happy to make alterations. Would you like to discuss this and remove the stigma around it? Phrase it in terms of this is a way of protecting both people's best interests. But the reason why those kinds of things aren't getting implemented is because of the feigned moral outrage of, oh, how could you possibly, doubt me? I am a woman. My virtue is beyond question. And it infuriates me. I just think it's a huge smokescreen. I don't see legitimacy in it.
Okay, fair enough. It'll be a bit more interesting than what your opinion is on this question, because this is, I guess, related to the topic that we've just spoken about, but a bit more lighthearted. It's not as serious.
Thank you.
Obviously, like, yeah, it's not as serious as, whose baby is whose, like, did that person cheat on me or anything like that. But is it ever okay? Let me just find a question. Is it ever okay to look for a partner's phone if you, for example, if you suspect he or she is cheating, or this is the interesting part of the question, is it okay to ask for permission to look for a partner's phone?
You can ask permission for anything, so long as they're an adult. That's fine. You can look through your partner's phone if you have reasonable grounds for suspicion, because their right to privacy can get trumped by your right to not be cheated on. You have to have very reasonable grounds. If you're just a paranoid person, you've been cheated on in the past, and you're projecting all of that onto your partner, and you're violating their privacy by going through their phone, when really there's nothing to blame other than your own emotions and paranoia and out of control, like irrationality, then that's on you. You've done something horrible and you need to make amends for it. But if you're generally a trusting person, but your partner is acting super sketchy and you have reasons to suspect that they're lying to you, they're cheating on you, and you want to save yourself 6 months, 3 years of wasting your time with a liar and a cheater, then their right to privacy has been forfeited. Like, in the hierarchy of rights, your rights suddenly trump over them. Now, if you find something, then you're completely vindicated. If you don't find something and like you were sure they were cheating on you, but you find zero evidence and everything is actually above board, then you were in the wrong. And then you need to reevaluate. You need to be like, oh shit, okay, I think I might be a paranoid person. I have trust issues. I'm going to confess to my partner what I did. I'm not going to defend myself. I'm going to ask for help. I'm possibly going to seek out therapy, to try and work on my issues, because I can't do that again. I've just done something really horrible. So it really depends on what you find. If you find something, well then, fucking good thing you checked.
I think this is a massive, massive issue for so many people in relationships, particularly guys. So I'd like to hear like the complete breakdown of what you would recommend, like in this situation playing out, because it is just so common, like for uh, a suspicion like that to happen in a relationship. Um, so do you think that the best solution would be to first ask for permission and then take action? What if she says yes? Like obviously you you have a right to check her phone and be able to like potentially gather evidence. How about if she says no? Do you think you should then go look anyway, or do you think you should obey her her answer to the question to say no? You should respect her privacy.
Your clue will be in how she responds with that particular no. So there'll be a couple of different ways. Like just by asking her, you'll get some clues. Like if you know her well enough because you've been dating her, you should be able to judge her mannerisms, her body language, her tone of voice. Like, does she seem concerned, like worried, like scared? In which case, that's another red flag to add to your list of suspicions. Or does she just seem hurt? Because if there's no fear, she's like, no, like this sucks. Like, I'm so upset. Like, why are you thinking this way? What have you been thinking about me? Or she's like, oh, what's wrong with you? Like, why do you want to check? Like, is she defensive or is she just genuinely hurt? So like ask that question and then judge your next actions based on what information you actually gather from her. In the instance that she is very evasive and she doesn't want you to check check her phone, the contents of her phone, you can put that off for the moment, because there's a bigger issue right in front of you, is that you just don't trust her. And you need to have a conversation about that. Like, look, I know this is a horrible thing to say, but you're going to say, you don't trust me and that's a fault with you. And holy shit, I've just realized I don't. We need to fix that. We need to work on that. Where has my trust gone? Is this an issue with me? Am I projecting past insecurities onto this current relationship? Or have there been things going on in our relationship that have genuinely caused me to lose trust? Like, remember that time you lied, or that time you didn't show up and I didn't know where you were? And like, we need to actually go through these in order to reestablish that trust.
Yeah, I think that's like all completely sound arguments. So if the woman gives a aggressive response, you recommend like that is an issue that potentially needs to be resolved, and there might be trust issues within the relationship. However, if she gives like a genuine, like heartfelt and hurt response, then like there could also be an issue there that you may have misinterpreted her behavior as potential means of cheating when it could be like completely disingenuous. But I guess a truly manipulative partner would be able to identify the ideal response to give. So if a woman was cheating and she was hiding her phone, once you do pose the question to her of, oh, can I look through your phone? I suspect you're cheating. Then she might identify the ideal response would be to like give a really heartfelt and hurt response, such as, how could like this is not right. Like, why are you asking me this? Like, I'm really hurt about this now. Like, because it sounds like you don't trust me.
We do. Okay, so this is a slightly tough one, because like, I think I have a slight bias, because as a man, my interest is in people and is interested in psychology and relationships and communication and things like that. And so there's probably a slight arrogance that I have of, I would be able to tell. Like, there's no chance that somebody would be able to be in a relationship with me and to spend all their time with me and then to secretly be having an affair with another person, and for me not to be able to realize something was going on. But for some guys who are really, they're interested in sports or, engineering or whatever like that, and the things like social skills and interpersonal relationships, that's not something they've dedicated as much time as I have. They might not be able to pick up on the signals that their partner is giving. And so I need to be very, very sensitive to that. But I don't think that it's realistic to say that a narcissist or a really manipulative, horrible, toxic, low quality woman is going to be as sophisticated as you just imagined. Like, we don't want to elevate these women and give them, more credit than they deserve, as if they're genuinely that clever or that powerful. There's a kind of dumbness, almost like a simplicity to a narcissistic person. Like, I can't imagine them being clever enough, if you were to confront them with something like that, to genuinely act hurt and to do that whole song and dance. The typical thing for somebody who's that, callous, is that they have an incapacity to feel any kind of shame or guilt. And so when they feel that, their instinctive reaction isn't to change track from, oh, I'm feeling guilt, but I'm going to represent that I have a different emotion. That requires an incredible psychological complexity and sophistication that these narcissistic type women don't have. What they're going to do is, there's a presence of guilt and shame here in this room, but I'm not going to take ownership of it or responsibility of it. I'm going to project it back to you. I'm going to make it your problem. You're the one who's making me feel this way, and there's something wrong with you. So they're not clever enough to change the emotion. They just change who the emotion belongs to. Does that make sense? So I think in most cases, unless she's a really, really, really smart girl and has really practiced at this stuff, you're going to be able to tell, because you're not going to get a genuine response of hurt. You're going to get blame and anger from her and making you feel like you've done something wrong, in which case, yeah, that'd be way more suspicious then.
Yeah, I think that would be a really, really unique case, and I agree with you that like the woman would have to be like highly intelligent, like top 1% of smarts, to be able to like identify that level of manipulation and what would the ideal like response be in that situation if she was like genuinely trying to cover something up and like avoid all like sense of blame and responsibility. But as you say, like that would be a really unique case. But for the general people watching like this video, like most of their examples are going to be like a genuine response where she is either like aggressive and like projecting the blame outwards towards you, in which case then you do have a genuine reason to be suspicious, or the other option, which is the harmless option, which if she is genuinely hurt, then you might think that she is telling the truth. I've really enjoyed that conversation. I think there was some like really high value content again. Like again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that my favorite content that you make is like the like actual advice where you break down step by step, like the different like paths and scenarios playing out, and what you should do if this happens. What should you do if this happens? I've got a few more questions left. Like I think we've covered everything on that particular topic. This one's similar to like the relationship sort of advice. What's your opinion on rebounds? So when a man and a woman split up, and the woman or the man sleeps with somebody else within the first couple of days after the breakup, potentially with somebody no. Do you think that's what's your opinion on that?
Sorry, is it a cop out if I say I don't really have much of an opinion on that? Like, I can see that it could be good in some circumstances. It could be horrible in other circumstances. Like, could just make you feel that much worse. If you've just given up like a really good relationship and then you have some cheap sex with a stranger who was drunk at the time, you could be like, oh my God, what the hell am I doing with my life? Like, what direction am I going? But on the other hand, if you've invested 5 years into a girl and it turns out she was a lying cheater, and you think, God, I'm never going to love again. There's no world outside of me. And then you meet some sweet girl, you hit it off, and you have like a rebound with her. Suddenly it could prevent you from doom and gloom and despair, make you go, God, my life isn't over. It could be positive. So I have no explicit opinion objectively on rebounds. It's entirely due to the circumstances.
Do you think, I think the main argument people present there though, is that if you are in that situation where you've had a 5-year relationship and then you suddenly have a rebound the next day with somebody else, do you think that's not a bit unfair on the person that you've slept with the day after? Because she might be thinking that the intimacy that you've had with her is a really special thing and like is so precious. But if she finds out the information that you were in a 5-year relationship and all of a sudden you've just slept with her like the day after, would she not like think, oh, the only reason you've now had intimacy with me isn't like because it's actually some pure and precious thing? It is just a means to cover up your own hurts and insecurities and damage that you've suffered in the last like recently after the breakup.
Yeah, definitely. Although I think that the argument there is less about the merits of rebounds and more just about honesty. Because if you're honest with her, then there's no issue. She consented and all that. Whereas if you withheld all that important information and you used her in that way, then you're a dick. But again, it's not about rebounds. It's just about honesty.
So do you think if that does happen, if a man does find himself in that situation, if he is planning on having intimacy shortly after a breakup, it is that woman's right to know about that breakup and how long the relationship lasted? Or do you think it is fine if he keeps it a secret from her?
Mm, I don't think people are necessarily entitled to all of your like backstory and things like that. It's just such an individual question. I think I would probably feel quite reluctant to prescribe any kind of like moral rule that could cover all situations. I appreciate that might be a little bit of a cop out. Let's say that if she asks questions, you do have something of a responsibility to either say to her the truthful answer or say, I would prefer if we didn't go into it. Is that okay? In which case, if she proceeds, knowing that you're withholding things from her, at least that's kind of on her. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I can tell like this sort of question is a bit nuanced, and obviously like we are trying to make like generalizations here for the audience, and you don't necessarily feel like that comfortable answering this question. So I'll move on to something else.
Yeah, I genuinely don't think that there's an objective answer to this one. You
Yeah.
could do it in a positive way, you could do it in a negative way, and so yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Um, right. This question, I think you'll like this one. And I got asked this question recently as well by a subscriber. And if I'm honest, it completely stumped me. But obviously, your channel specializing in evolutionary psychology, I hope that you'll be able to provide a more in depth response to it. So, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, who is more likely to develop feelings of empathy, men or women?
Women, I think. Women are incentivized to like look after like infants and children. The brain studies are quite remarkable that when men are the primary caregiver, they can show equal amounts to women. But if you just tend to look at like who are in the more like caring professions, like nursing and things like that, like the people-centered professions, it tends to be more women, and it's because they're more in touch with their emotions typically. They have a greater capacity for empathy. Where this gets more nuanced though, and what I make a point in my channel a lot, is that women's empathy doesn't flow in all directions naturally. So like when men do have empathy, it tends to be they have empathy for other men, they have empathy for women, they have empathy for children, they have empathy for animals. They're just kind of empathetic. For women, it's often a very specifically focused empathy, and it focuses on other women and children in particular. Where there seems to be a bit of a blind spot for women is showing empathy towards men. And I've got videos made on this, and I find it very frustrating because even though I can understand from an evolutionary psychology point of view why, you know, women were expecting to be taken care of by men, they didn't want to, you know, nurture and mother the big strong men, they expected it to be the other way around. I think that this is one of those blind spots that there is actually an onus and a responsibility on women to recognize that they might have a psychological limitation inside themselves that actually prevents them from truly considering what the emotional experience of men is like. And I do think that there's a responsibility on women to make that conscious effort to try and develop an empathy for men, to try and listen to men's issues. And it's probably one of the reasons why I'm so fond of, you know, my female Patreon subscribers, because, you know, of all the things they could do with their spare time, they're listening to me, they're listening to men talk about our struggles and trying to learn and understand and be more empathetic towards that. I think it's really admirable. I really have a lot of admiration, you know, for those women.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect biological sense for what you just said. Like when you think about a man and a woman, like after the woman has had the child, like the majority of her attention and time and energy is going to go towards the child and raising it. Meanwhile, the man in a monogamous relationship, he's still got to like have give protection above the man, above the woman and the child. Like he's got to take care of both, but the woman's attention isn't really going to be as focused on the man in that situation. And I remember it was a very recent video of yours that you had this really like good phrase that I remember like hearing. It was men give empathy to women, women give empathy to children, and children give empathy to animals. It was something along those lines. I'm not sure if I said it correctly there, but there might have been like other links as well that you made, but I just remembered that, and I just like I found that really eye-catching, and I remember that phrase.
Yeah, look, it's I mean, you can go into the nuance and the exceptions and all of that stuff, but when you hear that, it just hits like, oh shit, there's some truth to that hierarchy, right? And I think like even women will sort of acknowledge it. But you put it really well. So I don't really have anything to add on to that one. But yeah, that's kind of how it is. So I would say that empathetically, women are more in touch with their empathy than men are. It's just they've got that blind spot with this one regard.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, thanks for clearing up all of your opinions on that question. I've got two more questions. This one goes back to like the monogamy versus polygamy sort of thing that we was talking about at the start. Is it ever possible for a man or a woman to achieve true happiness in an open relationship?
Yes. Yes, of course.
You do believe?
Yeah.
Do you think? Do you think? I think the main arguments going against that though would be, particularly on the man's end, that if he finds out, well, obviously the very nature of an open relationship is the fact that the each party is able to sleep with whoever they want to, and obviously if a man is in that situation, he knows that a woman is sleeping with other men. Do you think that might project some sort of insecurity within himself, or even going even one step further on that? If the woman becomes pregnant in that open relationship, he, like, just by definition, he's not got 100% certainty that the woman, that the child is has his genetic material. It could be somebody else that the woman has slept with.
So far in our conversation, whenever I've referred to cuckoldry, it's been in the very negative sense of men. It's being done without their consent or their knowledge. But you'll probably be aware that it's not the sort of thing we tend to talk about in public, but being cuckolded is actually a sexual kink for some guys. It's a fetish where some men enjoy seeing their partners being, sexually manhandled by like other men, often like stronger guys with bigger dicks and things like that, and they get off on it. So my answer to your question, is it possible for people to be happy in an open relationship? I didn't mean for that to be like, oh yes, and it's encouraged and this is common, it's regular. No, for the most part, yeah, that's not going to work out. But just allowing for the massive variety in individual psychology in humans, of course you will find a certain percentage for whom are just wired a certain way, or they've had such unique circumstances growing up that have meant that jealousy is not that big of an issue for them, or whatever it is an issue, there are other issues that are solved by an open relationship, that they're willing to fix it. And within that minority, there will be some misery from people who are trying it and they're like, oh God, this doesn't work for me at all. But there'll be some success stories. And I'm 100% encouraging of that, not because I think that it's ultimately going to work, but because it's so useful for us to have more data. The more people who are trying open relationships, the more like we learn about whether or not it can work. And there are absolutely happy couples out there, or thruples, or pods, or whatever the polyamorous people are calling themselves these days. And there are also heaps of failures. For the most part, I'd say if we were judging this as a scientific experiment as to whether or not polyamory is a viable mating condition for men and women, like for the human species, the evidence that we have at the moment, I would say probably points to no. I still think more data needs to be collected. So hopefully more people try it and then tell us about their experiences, but it's causing more hurt than it's solving problems at this stage. It doesn't seem like it's fixing our issues of sexual jealousy or our desire for sexual variety. It tends to be that it's creating really messy situations and false expectations in a lot of the people who try it, but there will be some success stories. So that was what my answer was.
Okay, sounds good. Oh, this question just popped into my mind, and it sounds like a bit of a contradiction, because you mentioned at the start of that point that you're gonna have a certain percentage of guys, like really small, like let's just say 2-3%, whatever, who have this kink of cuckold, like they want to see their woman with other guys. To me, that makes zero evolutionary like psychology sense for a man to have that particular kink. What do you think there could be some sort of evolutionary psychology reasoning behind that, of why some men indulge in cuckolding relationships?
No, no, as far as I know, that would be maladaptive. So the thing about sexual kinks and fetishes is that they are highly dependent on upbringing and environment. I just read a book on a North Korean refugee, and they had no idea what sex was because sex was never taught about. They never saw their parents being intimate. And so there was zero expression of sexuality. There was a something going on, but it had no direction. It had no particular theme. So if you can think of sexual tastes and kinks and fetishes as a particular theme, it's going to be highly dependent upon what you are exposed to. No babies are born with having like a particular kind of kink or fetish. So if you look at the people who have like a BDSM taste or they're into cuckolding or whatever like that, there'll be something that's happened to them in their upbringing or something that they've exposed themselves to from the culture that's made their sexuality develop in that particular arena. And the reason I feel so confident saying that is because they've actually run experiments to see if they can specifically generate fetishes in people. Like, we're going to artificially make guys attracted to high-heeled shoes. And they showed them like porn with lots of high heels in them and like flashed images of high heels while they're aroused. And then they ultimately found that, yes, after the process of this experimenting, when they just showed these guys pictures of high heels with no naked women, no sex, they were getting erections, you know. And it shows how plastic our brain is with regards to sexuality and how it can develop a particular way. So I don't think that you'll find many answers in evolutionary psychology for why men would be interested in cuckolding. I think it's very much the nurture, not the nature in that regard.
Yeah, that sounds spot on, because obviously from an evolutionary point of view, like, cuckolding sounds completely maladaptive. Like, it would massively hurt a person's chance of passing on his genes rather than having a positive effect, because obviously he could end up raising a child that's not his, and that would be maladaptive for him. So I guess there is like the only other viable answer to that question would be because it's a matter of environmental conditioning, that something has happened in a man's upbringing for why he has that specific kink. So I think that was like a really good answer to that question. The last question I've got is, what's your opinion on relationships where either partner specifies that the other person watching explicit material is considered cheating? So this is kind of going back to the topics that we were talking about beforehand about trust and things like that. Do you think it is a viable argument for somebody to make, saying that you shouldn't watch explicit material because like you're getting off to somebody to some other people that's not that person?
That is a really good question to end this one on. That's a really, really good question. Ultimately, my perspective is, oh God, no one has asked me this one before, and I've successfully managed to evade this one. I feel like you've sort of trapped me slightly, but I'm going to give my
Well, if that's
answer.
the case, then if that's the case, I'm gonna hold you up for an answer then. I'm gonna make sure you answer it this time. You've been avoiding it all this time.
I'm going to give my answer to this one, but I think it's gonna show my bias a little bit. But here's the question: is what are we actually meant to do with male sexuality? Like, let's consider the fact that men have such an intense sex drive, so intense. Like, or as a society, how on earth are we meant to deal with that? You know, especially with so many men being single at the moment. Like, what is the solution? Like, is it to create cultural memes that celebrate promiscuity so women will sleep around a lot more? Well, that's certainly been tried to limited success. Is it sex dolls, you know, so that men can fuck plastic silicone and get their jollies out that way? Is it legalizing prostitution? I think there has to be some recognition that simply shaming men for having their sexual urges is not going to work. In the same way that teaching abstinence wasn't an effective form of birth control, simply telling men that your sexual desires and the fact that you want to fuck lots of women, that there's something bad and wrong with you, that's not going to work, because there's nothing more natural as a man than having that desire for lots of sex and lots of beautiful women. That's absolutely a fundamental part of your DNA. And if you're going with the original sin argument, trying to make men feel like there's something wrong with them for having that, then you're barking up the wrong tree as far as I'm concerned. You're lost and you're part of the problem. So is pornography a legitimate outlet for that sexual energy? And can you say that if a man has a monogamous sexual relationship with one woman, that should satisfy his sexuality to the point that he doesn't need to ever look at pornography? My answer on this one is No, I don't think that just telling him that there's something wrong with him is actually going to be a reasonable solution to that one. He might love his wife. He might really enjoy having sex with her. She might be sexually generous as well. She might fuck him 5 times a week. But guess what? She's never going to be 21 for the rest of her life. She's never going to be 5 different women appealing to his desire for variety. And I think that a certain amount of fantasy and self-exploration and masturbation to images or the occasional like adult movie, I understand like the nofap arguments and stuff like that. That's a whole nother kettle of fish, but I don't necessarily think that has to be a problem. So I would encourage women to make room for the male sexual experience being a lot different to their own. I think a lot of women struggle with, why is my man, watching other women? Am I not good enough? Please, like, don't judge your man by your own female value system. I understand it can hurt and then it can feel wrong, but you don't know what it's like to be a man. Like that sex drive is so strong. And for the most part, it's an unemotional experience, just having your jollies off, looking at some naked women, having a few orgasms aside from you in your regular lovemaking sessions. That's not really harming anybody. And it's meeting a need that he does have. And I just don't think that there's any better alternative out there. In fact, I think that it's probably preventing a lot of sexual frustration from men, which would come out in anger, probably preventing a lot of, seeing prostitutes, having affairs, things like that. I'm not saying it's perfect. Maybe if our biology was perfectly coded for monogamy, but we kind of have to deal with the hands that we've been dealt. And as far as I can tell, limited use of pornography is actually a pretty decent compromise. And so I think women would be well served to not shame their men for their use. So now everyone who wants to know, that's my answer.
Yeah, that was a really good response to that question. And just leading on from that, I guess this is a branch, like going further onto this question. Do you think it is manipulative if a woman asks a man to unfollow other women on his social media while they're in a relationship? Is that manipulative or is that a genuine argument?
Sorry, just to clarify, you've got the girlfriend saying to her boyfriend, please stop following these other women's Instagrams.
Yes. So like whether they're maybe like I guess you could break it down case by case. So if it's like a sexual partner that he's had, or if they're just friends, or if they're just like Instagram models that have like millions and millions of followers, do you think any of those times it is acceptable for the woman to ask the man to unfollow those profiles?
Thank you for asking that, because it gives me the chance to even expand upon my previous question, which is that like you can have an unhealthy use of this stuff, and most men's use of it is unhealthy because they're using it too much and they're using it in place of intimacy. And so if a man is so lost in fantasy going through his Instagram feed that his relationship with his girlfriend is genuinely suffering, then I think she has every right to bring it up. Like, hey, I think that this is getting in the way of us. We're not connecting as much. And, like, I think you would be well served to stop that. I think there's absolutely legitimacy in that argument. But if it's really not something that she can notice and it's harmless, for the most part, like it's not having any effect on her, I think she would be well served. Like if she was asking advice, I would probably tell her, if you can learn to live with it, I would learn to live with it. Because if you're holding out like for some man who only has eyes for you and doesn't consider any other woman on the planet attractive, and he hates looking at beautiful women, you're just going to end up alone and single, like certain things aren't going to change. And so just have realistic expectations. I think you'll be happier adjusting your expectations rather than using shame to try and control what your man does. Now, if he's an addict, yes, deal with that. But if it's just normal, healthy stuff, learn to live with it. That's probably my advice.
Yeah, I think that is consistent with your previous response to the last question I asked as well. That's all the questions I've got like lined up for you today. I thought of quite a few on the spot as well, and I think you've done excellent responses to all of them. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or any other thoughts like that you've got on your mind? I saw you like writing down on your piece of paper or like maybe your computer screen a couple of times. So was there anything else, other topics that you wanted to discuss?
Just looking what I've got written, and no, I think we adequately covered it. There is one thing I'd like to talk to you about before we go, and I kind of want to ask your permission for something, Wheat Waffles, because the first time that we became aware of each other on the internet was when I released that video of me reacting to the video you made to my face. And I'm not happy with that video. Now that I've got to know you, I think about like the way that I interpreted and what I imagined your actual motives for doing it. And I'm like, God, it's wrong. I was so wrong. And it kind of bothers me that there are still people watching that video, getting not at all my accurate perception of what's actually going on. But I didn't want to do anything like sly and sneaky, or like being accused of unhanded, like unlisting the video or deleting it, without anybody telling anybody. So I just wanted to ask you, do I have your permission to delete that video from my channel? I don't want people to see it anymore. I'd rather people watch our more recent interactions.
What, the one where, what is it, you did a reaction to my video of my, wait, no, let me get this right, that your video, which was a response to my video, that one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah, of course. If you want to delete it, you can. It's your channel as well, so I don't even feel like you need to ask me permission for it. You can do whatever you want with your channel.
It's a moral permission. In the sense of like, I kind of feel like that was a misstep where I made some assumptions about you and your motives, and you definitely proved me wrong with that regard. And so I look a little bit foolish. And so I was just, hoping, rather than like you lording it over me in some kind of sense of like, I showed you were wrong. I just wanted you to the opportunity to be magnanimous and be like, no, gracefully. I recognize that you made a mistake with that Alexander, and I appreciate like you're fine to cover your tracks and to remove that mistake from the internet because you don't want it on there anymore.
No, absolutely not. Like, even if like I wouldn't engage in like that kind of foolish behavior anyway. Like if you did take that video down, like even without my permission, I wouldn't stoop to like a low and like try to create arguments or like YouTube wars, being something like, oh, I've shut this guy Alexander down, like he can't handle the truth, like he should swallow the black pill. He needs to, like, he's swallowing it, he can't handle the truth, he's shying away. Like, I would never do anything as irresponsible as that. So it's completely fine with me if you take the video down. I'm glad you've like I'm actually glad, that you've asked permission for it now, because I think the argument that you've made was quite good.
Oh, you're a great guy. Look, and for the people listening to this, like Wheat and I have chatted a little bit off like stream and stuff like that, and like keep watching his content. I think he's a very sincere guy, and I was grateful for the opportunity to come onto his channel and let you know a little bit about what I'm about. I don't focus so much on the look stuff, which you're probably used to seeing on his channel. I do cover that like occasionally, but it's in a much wider context. I'm sort of interested with every aspect of relationship psychology and gender dynamics. So if you liked the kind of stuff that you heard from me on this channel, please come check out my channel. Maybe Weed will put like a link to my channel in this description box, but you'd be most welcome.
Yeah, I will do. Yeah, a link to your channel will be at the top of the description box, and I'm sure like our channels like cross over quite a lot, like in terms of the topics we're speaking about. So I'm sure a lot of people will be happy to watch your channel if they're not already aware of it as well.
Cool.
In fact, I think on my channel, in the analytics page, it tells you what other channels people watch who already watch your own channel. And I remember yours, it's in like the top 5 of like shared audiences.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah. Sounds good. So is that everything that you've got for me today?
That's all.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot.
See you guys.